there, Greenfield. I'm Superintendent Galvan with the Greenfield Union School District, reading stories to you, and I'm so glad you're still with us and ready to listen to a story every day. Today's a beautiful story, and it's called So Tall Within, and it's a long walk towards freedom, and it talks about slavery and the trials and tribulations of people who have struggled to get to have freedom in their life, libertad. So, hola comunidad de Greenfield, soy Superintendente Galván del Distrito Escolar de Greenfield leyendo otra historia con ustedes. Y hoy vamos a leer de una historia de la libertad y de los caminos de la gente, de nuestras comunidades, de los africanos americanos, desde el mundo, del pasado hasta hoy. Y vamos a leer de lo que una historia sobre ese camino. So Tall Within se llama la historia, entre alto, entre nosotros, y vamos a leer lo que pasa en esta historia con esta persona y nuestra grupo de personas. So thank you for joining us. We always want to learn from our past in order to move forward into the future. And this one is talking about slavery. In slavery time, when hope was a seed waiting to be planted, Isabella lived in a cellar where the windows never let the sun in and the floorboards never kept the water out. She had 10 or 12 brothers and sisters, and she couldn't be sure, since almost all of them were sold as slaves before she was old enough to even remember. But Mau Bet, her mother, kept them in memory. Sometimes at night, she felt and held Isabella and pointed to the skies over the New York state. Those are the same stars, and that is the same moon that looked down upon your brothers and sisters, she whispered. And Isabella looked at those same stars and that same moon, and she dreamed. When Isabella was about 9 years old, she was sold for $100, along with a flock of sheep. Mau Bet held her one last time. They would always remember to look at those same stars and that same moon, even though they would be ever so far away from each other. Every night after that, Isabella kept her eyes wide open. In slavery time, happiness was a dream, never coming true. Isabella was put to work. Now the war begun, she thought. First she worked for Mr. Neely, who figured she didn't need shoes in wintertime. 2 years later, she worked for Mr. Schreier, who had her carry fish and hoe corn and dig roots and tend herbs and tote gallons of dark molasses. A year and a half later, after that, she worked for Mr. Dumont, who bragged that Isabella could do a good family's washing in one night and be ready in the morning to go into the fields. And she did, night after night, day after day, night after night, day after day, night after night, and day after day. But sometimes she looked up at those stars and that moon, and she asked God if he thought it was right. In slavery time, when respect fell as often as snow in July, Mr. Dumont ordered Isabella to marry a slave named Thomas. She had 5 children: James, who died in infancy, Diana, Peter, Elizabeth, and Sophia. At night, under those same stars and that moon, she wondered if her children and her children's children would always be slaves too. In slavery time, when promises were thin as old smoke, Mr. Dumont swore that if she would do well, he would free Isabella and give her a log cabin to live in by the next summer, a year before all the slaves in the New York state had to be freed by law. But the summer came and the summer passed. Oh, thought Isabella, I have felt as if I could not live. So that fall, after the work of the harvest was done, She held baby Sophia close and seized freedom with her own hands. Along the road, she came to the house of Isaac and Maria van Wagner. They followed her and welcomed her inside. They promised they would never abandon her. Though they were there when Mr. Dumont found Isabella. "You've run away from me?" said Mr. Dumont. "No," said Isabella. "I walked away in the daylight." "Ah, you must go back," he said. Isabella shook her head. "I shall take the child," said Mr. Dumont. But Isaac and Maria kept their promise. They paid Mr. Dumont's price for all the work Isabella might have done before she was freed by law, and they paid his price for the baby too. So Mr. Dumont left. Isabella asked Isaac and Maria if they were her new masters. Isaac shook his head. He was master to no one, he said. And now Isabella was slave to no one. So they're letting her go. Let's see. But in slavery time, broken promises were like leaves on a tree. Mr. Dumont sold Isabella's 5-year-old son, Peter, to Mr. Gedney, who sent him down south. Though Isabella could not read or write, she knew that in New York, where they lived, no slave could be sold outside the state's border. Isabella, on foot and alone, went to the Dumont's house and knocked on the door hard, and when it opened, she said, "I'll have my child." Mr. Dumont shook his head. "A fine fuss to make," she said, and closed the door. So Isabella walked to the Gedney house and knocked on the door. "I must have my child." Mrs. Gedney told her that Peter had gone to live with her married daughter to have enough of everything, and he treated her like a gentleman. But Isabella knew this was a lie. "My boy has gone to be a slave, and he is too little to go so far from his mother," she said. Mrs. Gedney closed the door. But Isabella thought, "I felt so tall within. I felt as if the power of a nation was within me." Isabella traveled miles and miles across New York to Kingston to tell her story to the grand jury. They saw how tall within she was. They gave her a letter for the sheriff, demanding that Peter he be brought home. She took the letter and walked miles and miles back. Peter was already far in Alabama, but Mr. Gedney read the letter and knew he must obey the court. He went down south to find Peter while Isabella waited and prayed. "God, help me get my son. If you were in trouble as I am and I could help you as you can me, think. After a few months, Isabella found and held Peter again. But the Alabama masters had whipped Peter and kicked him and beat him. He would never really heal. That was slavery. In slavery time, when chains tore families apart like the wind frays a flag, Isabella still looked up at those stars and that moon and hoped her brothers and her sisters saw them too. They did. A year after Peter was freed, he and Isabella moved to New York City, where she met a woman named Nancy at Zion's church. When they held hands, Isabella said, "The bony hardness was just like mine," but Nancy passed away. Soon afterwards, she met her sister Sophia, and then her brother Michael, who had been stolen from her long ago. They told her they had found another sister in the city, but she had just died. Her name was Nancy. Then Isabella understood that one of the first people she had met in New York City was her own sister, but she had not even known it. "What is this slavery?" wondered Isabella, "that it can do such dreadful things to people?" In slavery time, when words seemed weaker than whips. Sojourner's Truth left New York City with a bundle of clothing on one arm and a basket of food on the other. She began to speak out against slavery to whomever would listen. Not everyone wanted to hear it, but she said, "The lever of truth," she spoke. In Massachusetts, she said, "What a beautiful world this is to be when we should see everything right side up." In Ohio, she said that she had been seeing some of the children sold off into slavery. And when I cried out with a mother's grief, none heard. In Indiana, she said, the truth is powerful and will prevail. And in Washington, D.C., when a streetcar conductor pulled up for her, she cried, "I want a ride," she loudly said to the carriage traffic around them, and she got on. The conductor threatened to throw her off, but she told him that she knew the laws as well as she did. And she stayed on that and rode longer than she had planned to make the most of it. For years and years, the Sojourner Truth walked and told her story and fought for freedom. And when slavery time finally ended, she felt so tall within. In freedom time, when hope kindled and fire in the dark and happiness winked over the horizon, Sojourner Truth told an audience in Massachusetts, "Children, I have come here like the rest of you to hear what I have to say." And what she had to say was plenty. She spoke of the woman's right to vote. She spoke about making prisons more humane. She asked the government to offer land to former slaves. She spoke against capital punishment. For almost 15 more years, she walked thousands of miles to Philadelphia and to Brooklyn and to Washington, D.C., and to Kansas and Iowa and Missouri and Wisconsin and Illinois and all over Michigan. And everywhere she went, she spoke of freedom. In freedom time, when respect wanted to show its face and broken promises tried to mend, Sojourner Truth walked to Battle Creek, Michigan, where she lived with her free daughters and her free grandchildren. And Sojourner Truth was weary and ready to lay down her lever. In freedom time, when the chains broke and words got up and sing, and tiredness, oh tiredness, danced a hallelujah, Sojourner Truth asked herself, what is anybody in the world for? Then she looked up at those same stars and that same moon, and she saw them shining over everyone. And she knew that she had been in the world. She knew what she was in the world for. I had work to do, she thought. My lost time that I lost being a slave was now made up. And that is the end. So Tall Within gave her the grace and the power and the wherewithal to make sure that she made a change in the world, to end slavery. And so this is a beautiful story on the long walk towards freedoms and how important it is for us to stand up for things that we believe in and what's right for all people. And so thank you for joining us today for this selection, So Tall Within. And I will continue to read you wonderful selections like this and send you great big bear hugs from our family to yours.